to answer your question about how long I've been at it, always is the answer. When I was a kid, I was one of those that liked to sit inside and draw when people were outside, and so not that I was just a recluse or anything. I knocked around like most kids, but I've always loved doing this stuff. And about the time I guess I was in the 5th or 6th grade, I can remember people standing around me and watching me draw. And so, like most things, when you start to get some positive reinforcement for it, you gravitate to it and you keep going. So I've made pictures all my adult life. I got my undergraduate degree from Ohio Wesleyan, a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, and then 20 years later I went back to Ohio State and I got my MFA in painting there. And meanwhile, I've always had a career, as you know, in arts management, and worked at museums and so on and so forth. And in 1998, I had the great fortune of landing the presidency at the Columbus College of Art and Design. So that's my day job, and it's one of my loves, and this is my night job, and it's my other love. So what you're looking at here is the first phase of a process in which I use oil paint and paint sticks, like these things that that you just buy that have a lot of wax in them, and then I'm using here refined beeswax that you can get in 1-pound tubes. I got a box of this stuff here. I'll show you what it looks like. It's got a terrific aroma, and it's pretty low tech here. I've got an old electric skillet, courtesy of one of the Salvation Army places, and I'm painting on sheets of prepared birch plywood here that's been sanded and gessoed on one side. So this is a fairly improvisational process, but the improvisation's based on having done painting and mark making for years and years. And so for me, there's a kind of, if you think of the jazz idiom, there's like a call and response notion here. And so I've got graphite marks under the surface, and I've got a first layer of beeswax put on here. And I'm just interested in making surfaces that are juicy and beautiful to me. And they seem to be regarded well by other folks. So I'm really after a kind of language of marks that is non-objective. I'm not trying to create the illusion of anything here. It's really more about the surface and play for me. And so what I'm going to do here in a minute is squeeze a little oil pigment into this beeswax, which is melted, and what I want is just enough to get in there to suspend so that the amount of pigment that's in the beeswax for this next layer is fairly thin. I don't want it to be too opaque, and so I just put a little bit in there. And this is hot enough to be uncomfortable if it splashes on you, but it's not so hot that it doesn't hurt you. So what I'm going to do, take some of that pigment back out. And for right now, I just need to dab this someplace. I need a palette. Let me grab a palette here. And I'm going to dump this on the surface and squeegee it around here in a minute. And the advantage for me, because of what I do professionally in the day as an administrator at CCAD, is that I can build up surfaces that have a lot of complexity to them and a lot of subtlety, and I can do it very quickly. So I'm going to dump this on here and squeegee it around a little bit. So, Chris, when we started to talk, you said, well, you want to know about, kind of the ideas behind the work. And the funny thing is, a lot of this really is about improvisation and technique and loss of control. So this stuff's going to gel very quick. It doesn't really gel, but it's going to get solid quite rapidly because it's just about changing temperature. There's that. Now I can reheat this using a paint strip gun and rework it. And when marks and things go on there that I don't like, I can remove them by scraping them away with one of the various palette knives I've got, or cut back down through it here. So, you know, sometimes people look at completely abstract work, non-objective work like this, and, you know, the typical response is a child of 6 could do it. And in my case, they may be right. Except I'm at pains to say I've been doing this for now. I'm 50, so I've been doing this for a long time. And there's things that happen that are just a function of, you know, it's like when I do portraits, which I sometimes do, I take a photograph and I work from the photograph, and that's like following a score. And this is like, you know, this is truly improvisational, and so the mark making and color and the things that happen are just a function of having done it for so long. So once I get some things on here to think about, I usually let them sit for a while, meaning that they're kind of, I'm interested in a dialogue between the surface and the quality of marks. They're really kind of, they're almost more drawings than they are paintings, and so the way that these bits of paint go on the surface, and the graphite that shows through, and the little marks that scratch down through the surface, all that's the stuff that I'm really interested in, and trying to create a poetic tension between surface and the illusion of depth. And I struggled for the longest time with a palette that was really kind of dark. There's this just read a great article that somebody emailed to me from a presentation at some national conference here recently, where a scholar was talking about the correlation that seems to exist in contemporary art between, you know, the more disturbing or dark a work of art is, sometimes the more seriously we take it. And it wasn't so long ago that I finally just decided that rather than having my paintings be really dark, sort of troubling, that I'm comfortable with beauty. And so for me, these pictures are really about beauty. So I'm going to leave that alone for a while. You know, you do this all your life, and I've got a love affair with just the process of making pictures. And it's really a joy to be able to do things as casually as these marks that you've just watched me make, And they're just, God, I just love the way that these surfaces work with little tiny bits and pieces of, you can see down through it there. There's scratches in the surface, and there's translucency where this beeswax just went on there, and immediately, as soon as it hit the cool wood, it dried, if you will. It's not so much dry as it's just solid again. It goes from liquid to solid. So I just love all these little leftover bits and pieces of things that happen when you draw that beeswax across there, and it leaves this kind of legacy of mark making. And so the viewer reads this stuff, and then you kind of want to look for meaning in it. And of course, as I mentioned before, I'm not trying to make plant life or whatever, but I started making some of these forms, these little curlicue shapes that are all kind of chained together, and some of the little doodly things that are underneath the surface there really came from places like encyclopedias and news articles about, viruses or microscopic plant forms, and so I like it when you look at these things, and on the one hand, they might be kind of a landscape or a view of the world through a microscope, and on the other hand, they just could be, if sort of a view out a window, I suppose. Most of these are pretty flat. Sometimes you get kind of an illusion of depth, which I think is starting to happen in that picture I was just working on. But all of these are just, as you can see, pretty similar in terms of the kinds of forms. But the colors, it's the interaction between the colors and the surface and the scratchings that really I'm enamored with. With this work, there's the business of getting it to a kind of a point, and then living with it for a while, and waiting to see if the balance of the forms and I think the sort of happy tension between surface and the marks and the color and the overall kind of composition that comes from that dialogue between those things, if it continues to hold up. And so like a writer that will, I suppose, sit down and get a few pages, if they're really disciplined, a few pages every day as they develop a novel or an essay or whatever, and then go back and really look critically at what's been said and how it's been said. I need to, once I get these things complete, if you will, prop them up here and leave them and sit down in my chair over there and just really let the work kind of talk back to me to see if it's still holding water and if it needs little kind of nuances. So, in fact, I just made a mark on there right now that I don't know that I can live with. So the nice thing about that is I can remove it with a little bit of thinner. But anyway, so the editorial process, which is self-induced and based on the dialogue, not only that happens inside the picture, but between them. I've got this show up right now at Hammond Harkins Gallery, and that work's all pretty new within the last year and a half. And it's great to have a show up because you get the people that aren't in the studio with you when you're making them, but are sort of in your head. You get their feedback. And the hard part, though, about having all the work gone from the studio is I don't have it to refer to. And part of the process with all this work is that there's, if each of these is kind of metaphorically a movement in a symphony, you really need to have the whole symphony and then start to understand, which movement is fast and which one is more contemplative. And so I'm kind of interested in having each of these pieces be unified in terms of the whole, the language that's been invented, but I also want each piece to be discrete and self-sufficient. And so when the work's out for the show, it's not there for me to look at and think about. Well, what I said earlier about something, actually, you were talking about Alan Crockett. I think it was Alan that had said to me when I was up at Ohio State that he read some, I don't remember who the artist is, might have been Philip Guston, might have been somebody else, talked about when you're in the studio, there are all these people in your head. You know, it's the critics, it's your friends, it's the imaginary patron, you know, that you might be painting with them in mind. And the hard part is to get sort of those people out of your head and sort of push them out the door of the studio so it's you and the work, and you can have that relationship with the work. Make it without being overly influenced by what people will say or think. And if you can get to the point where you're really digging deep into your own kind of intellect and soul and making things that are very, very personal, that's a kind of a rare thing. It's actually surprising to me how easy it is for me to continue to work with you in here. I wouldn't have expected that. So there's an example, you know, that was just very light in value, very subtle color shift here. And so just almost intuitively, while talking here, it seemed to me that needed to be just a slightly darker value in a similar kind of chroma range, and that little thing there makes me a little happier with that picture, that one little dark mark. So there's an example of that editorial process. So, you know, in sum total, that's what all this is about for me. I think one of the things that probably, you know, you can see is that the different pictures have different kinds of moods to them, and that's also a function of trying to set up these color relationships. Particularly, well, in pictures like these, I'm also working with complementary colors. You know, there's a sort of purplish raspberry color background, if you will, or the first layer, and then the secondary layer of beeswax is this Mars yellow, which is really almost kind of an ochre color, and that's not a perfect complement, but it's certainly on the other side of the color wheel. So in some cases I've been doing things in which the layers here, reds and oranges, are very close in terms of their kind of affinity. In other cases it's kind of interesting to me to do these things like we just were working on here, which is creates a different kind of attention, light and dark, and also pretty far apart on the color wheel. I guess, you know, I must be a formalist's formalist, because these are, you know, they're not, this is not political work by any stretch of the imagination. Well, we've moved from the studio to the gallery. We're here at Hammond Harkins Gallery in Bexley, where I've got this show up now, and so you can see that from what we were just looking at in the studio, for starters, sure helps to dress these things up in a nice frame, doesn't it? I'm always thrilled to see how much different they look when they are framed. But from the example of watching me work in the studio, you can see some of the evidence of technique here. That business of drawing wax around with the big squeegee, and then you know, working back over the surface here. And in this case, you know, some of the marks are made with a brush charged up with wax from the hot pan and laid on real quickly. And then I go back in and, you know, define the outlines or change the value or whatever. But this exhibition really represents about a year and a half's worth of work of you know, working with various formats like this, much, you know, what I think of as a very landscape-like format. The horizontality of this thing suggests a kind of almost like a sunset to me, and of course the use of these kind of marks give you a horizon line. But you know, it doesn't. They're not that literal. They're just they're still improvisational. And this, you know, when I was talking earlier about how valuable it is to have the workaround to look at it. There's some things that I was doing in this picture that I kind of want to go back to the studio and think about. There's yellow worked on top of the surface here, which creates some of this kind of glow, and this real hot, fiery orange that's in the background there. So helpful to have this, to have the things that you've happened upon when you make other pictures available to you for reference, because the process of making work, the way I work, is a process of invention and happy accident and self-discovery. And so the kind of the marks and the surfaces and some of the drips and things that are going on here, things that I'd like to give an effort to replicate in some newer work. And it's so it's good for me to be back here and see all these old friends. These suites of smaller pictures were done all at about the same time, and much like what we saw in the studio, 4 or 5 or 6 of them would develop, and then I'd go back and edit them after I had a chance to study them. You can see that there's a different kind of, well, I think they're a little denser than some of the more, you know, the larger, more recent ones. And an actual point of fact, as you look around the gallery here, the pictures that are the smallest were done earliest, and I've tried to ramp up the scale of these things to larger and larger pictures, just because I like the ability to really get the whole arm motion into some of the gestures. But just like the other ones, these have little tiny changes in the surface and the little bits of graphite that are on the panel to start with, or the things that sort of juice it up for me. So the fun thing is about this work, when I see my own work, I just want to go make more of it. I just want the experience of doing these things. It's so much fun. Huh. I have to think about these color interactions. This one in particular seems like a really nice thing to have, and I'd like to go back to the studio here this afternoon, and that one we were looking at earlier, I'd like to take it more in this direction. Colors feel really spring-like to me somehow, you know? All those wonderful kind of yellowish greens. I've been giving these pictures names, and I typically name them after they're done. This one, for some reason, this big funny shape here reminded me of an island, and it reminded me of actually the country of Madagascar, which is what the picture's named. So something about the shape, the color that was sort of sea-like or ocean-like. Doesn't mean it's supposed to be Madagascar, but it's sort of a reference point. And I guess if we can, you know, rely on the notion that these are really kind of the text that these offers, I hope, is kind of a poetic text that's not deliberate, but only has sort of subtle layers of meaning, and nothing really so direct as to say this is what it has to be about. It really helps to study these things. Hey, Lavetta. Hi. How you doing? Happy Saturday. Makes me really happy. Yeah, thank you. It does. This feels like something sometimes you just get lucky, you know, when it's this improvisational. But boy, I really am happy with this picture. Really happy with that picture. I was saying to Chris earlier, you know, there are things that you stumble on as you're working, little kinds of marks or whatever, and with all these out of the studio, when I'm trying to work now, I don't have them to refer to sort of try to repeat some things little inventions that have happened in the process of making them. And so it's so nice to come in here and see them, because I can kind of then go back and say, okay, there's some things happening in this surface, and I remember now that I see it, I can remember how it was made. But just to kind of continually reinvent, which is what these are about, is challenging. So I may be about out of words for you, my friend.